12:15 and we're live in Westminster. Joining me today, Conservative MP Bim Afellami, Shadow Home Office Minister Sarah Jones, the writer and commentator Inaya Falarin Iman, and the commentator and former Labour advisor John McTernan. Today, the Prime Minister says this.
I don't want a second national lockdown.
But it might not feel like it for many as new restrictions are applied across the northeast of England.
With winter on the horizon, we must prepare, bolster our defences, and come together once again against this common foe.
Would you call Thank you for joining us. All of that to come, but first we're going to focus on coronavirus. The number of cases continue to rise. The number of restrictions in the number of places continue to rise too. And if you look at the front page of the Times, they're suggesting this idea of a curfew on bars and restaurants. In other words, them closing at 10 o'clock, which to me sounds like 2 hours less eating and drinking rather than a curfew. But Bim, it sounds like this measure, which is in place in some places in England at the moment as a local restriction, might be going nationwide pretty soon.
Well, the situation, may change, and I think that the Prime Minister and the Health Secretary have been very clear about that. But fundamentally, the Prime Minister has made it very clear publicly and privately that he does not want to see another national lockdown. That is not what we're trying to do. And that's why we're taking this localized approach where we see that cases rise, at a very high level or unsustainably. We take an action to bring them down, like we did in Leicester, and is now happening in the northeast. I think that sort of varied approach is the best way to deal with these cases.
Sarah, how would your constituents feel about 2 hours less in the pub?
Well, we're going to have to do what we have to do, and I think I'll make 2 points. The first is that we're going to have to keep doing these kind of measures of restricting people's movements if we don't get on top of that test and trace system. And at the moment, people in Croydon are coming to me, the whole system's ground to a halt. They're having to travel to Coventry to get a test. There's schools that have been promised tests that haven't arrived. The whole system is grinding to a halt, and the government are being very confusing in terms of what people should be doing, when they should be staying at home, how they should be responding. And the second point I'd make just about curfews is that as the Shadow Policing Minister, obviously I talk to the police. And this lack of clarity about what the government is saying people should do, when should they contact the police? The Home Secretary disagrees with the Prime Minister. It's not clear. And the police say to me they can't do their job of making sure these measures are enforced unless the government does its job and is completely crystal clear about what is needed, why it's needed, and gets people on side. And I don't think they're doing that at the moment.
Well, we're going to be talking about all those things throughout the next 45 minutes, so that's good. Inaya, is 2 hours less drinking, if you want to call it a curfew, whatever you want to call it, is that a price worth paying to protect people's health, or is that just unjustified?
No, I don't think it is a price worth paying. I mean, 5 minutes ago we had Eat Out to help out and do the patriotic thing and go to the pub. And then, a few weeks later, we are being told that we might have a local lockdown and curfews for hospitality and pubs, I think that is completely unfair. I mean, originally we had the national lockdown, a completely unprecedented situation to increase capacity for the NHS, and now the rationale for things are completely different. The death rate is ridiculously low, very low, and we welcome that. And now it just seems like a very disjointed, reactive approach and full of U-turns. I think that the government is sending a very confused message, and I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people don't end up following it.
Inaya, will you just knock off work 2 hours early then and start drinking quicker?
Well, I think that we need to have much more consistency. I think that we cannot open up or have life in any way back to normality or be able to start improving the economy again and people's daily life if one day to the next we're going to have a completely change of policy. I don't think that's the way forward, and I think it will do a lot of damage to trust.
John, you're a political communications professional. What do you make of just the messages that the government has given out at various points? Because it's hard, isn't it?
I think the government's been at its best when it's been its most direct. So stay at home, that's pretty clear. Rule of 6, that's pretty clear. It gets itself into difficulty when it tries to nuance that message. And I think the difficulty that they're tackling at the moment is we always knew that when you brought back schools and universities at the same time as you've got pubs opening and the hospitality industry opening up, there's going to be the risk of a rise. And we're seeing in the local lockdowns, lots of local lockdowns being imposed, very few local lockdowns ever being lifted. Been mentioned Leicester's still in lockdown. So lockdown it's gradually creeping towards, it's 10% people in England, it's nearly a third of the population of Scotland.
All of this England-wide at. Now, throughout the programme, I'm going to be ably assisted by Chris Curtis from the pollsters YouGov. Hello, Chris. Talk us through this restrictions, lockdown, curfew issue, whatever you want to call it. In terms of the actual measures, what do the public think about the measures? And in terms of the scope, about whether they should just be in a town, a county, a part of the country, or the whole country?
Well, I think broadly speaking, the public have been very hawkish when it comes to lockdown measures. They've supported almost all of the measures that have been put in place, and they're generally quite keen to have stricter measures put in place if it's considered necessary by the government. So when we test the curfew policy, for example, the 9 p.m. one, it's got overwhelming support among the public, and that's generally true across the board. So I think if the government ever did need to bring in measures, they'd widely be supported by the public. The political difficulty, I think, is that if they accept that they need to start bringing back in measures, it creates the question of, well, did you ease too early? Were you pushing too many people to start going back to restaurants and things? And was that a mistake? So the difficulty for the government is not getting support for new measures, it's that it maybe makes their previous decisions look like mistakes, and that could weaken their support.
Oh, that's interesting. So actually doing something reflects on what you did in the past, not necessarily what you're doing right now. I hadn't actually quite thought about that. Now, the reason we're talking about all of this is because new restrictions have just been announced in the northeast of England by Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary, in Parliament. Our correspondent Fiona Trott is there in Newcastle. Hello, Fiona. Tell us what these restrictions are and why they've had to bring them in the first place.
Well, from tomorrow, residents in seven council areas won't be able to socialise with other people outside their own household. Support bubble. Bars will be restricted to table service. A lot of them have adapted to that already since the pandemic came into force. Of course, they're trying to encourage social distancing, but bars like this one here on Grey Street in the city centre also will have to close between 10 o'clock at night and 5 o'clock in the morning. Let me remind you of the local authorities we're talking about here. Newcastle, Gateshead, North Tyneside, South Tyneside, Sunderland, Northumberland and County Durham. Let me explain to you why they asked for these measures to be introduced. Positive cases are on the increase. Latest figures show that there were 93 people infected per 100,000 in South Tyneside alone, and the average age of people catching coronavirus has also increased. Now, Here in Newcastle City Centre, we've spoken to people about these tougher restrictions. Actually, they're very relaxed about it. They understand why they are needed. They don't want a full lockdown, and they have seen tougher measures be introduced in other towns and cities in England too. For businesses, though, like this one, it's a different story. I spoke to one bar owner earlier, and he said, look, the nighttime economy is worth £340 million to this city alone every year. I get most of my customers after around 10 o'clock at night. It's going to hit businesses like him hard. One important thing to mention, the council leader here, Nick Forbes, is saying that this is not a lockdown. These tougher measures are being introduced to avoid a full lockdown. And this region can't afford that. It has the highest unemployment rate in the UK, which is why council leaders like him across those 7 areas here in the northeast of England are saying that these measures have to be introduced and they have to work.
Fiona, thank you very much. Very clear. It's not just the northeast of England. There are also new restrictions in Wales. Here's Wales Online talking about new restrictions in the Rhondda. 200 positive cases in just 5 days. And we've got some more numbers for you. As I was saying, Thursday lunchtime is the time that the updated test and trace statistics come out. And the really eye-catching thing is the turnaround times. So that's the number of people getting a test in various forms and then getting the results within 24 hours. The week before, if you went to a regional test site, 66% of people got their test within 24 hours. That in the last week has gone down to 38%. Bim, that's pretty much a halving of people getting their tests in 24 hours. That is bad, isn't it?
Well, it's obviously not what we want to see, and we know there's been a lot of problems in the last week or so. In my own constituency, both people from Harpenden and Hitchin have said to me, you know, they've been trying to get tests, they haven't been able to get them quickly enough. But understanding the context for this, you know, we have in this country tested more people than anyone in Europe. Our testing rates as a proportion of the population are higher than countries like Germany and Spain.
Yeah, but we have done a test for your child. You don't care what somebody in Germany's getting, do you?
No, I understand that and I agree with it. What we're doing now is we are, as quickly as we can, expanding that capacity. So we've got 4 new labs, I think, coming on stream in the coming weeks. We're buying new lab capacity abroad. We are trying to expand it as quickly as we can. And we need to do that. What has been happening is that there's been a huge amount of pressure put on the system over the last couple of weeks as a greater number of people who aren't showing symptoms are asking for tests. Now, I understand why that is the case, because obviously people want as best they can to go to work and go to school, get their kids to school and get on with their lives in as normal a way as possible. But we have to remember that, you know, we do need to prioritise key workers. We also need to make sure that people who have symptoms are the people who get tests. And putting this together, getting the priorities right and making sure that we expand our capacity should mean that in the coming weeks, you know, this should get sort of ironed out. But look, I don't minimise the difficulty. Of course it's difficult, and every single constituency MP knows of that happening.
Bim, when are we going to find out this priority list for testing?
I think it's due out imminently. I don't know exactly when it's coming out, but I think it's already been made clear that it is going to be key workers who are prioritised first.
Sarah, you were complaining about the government's handling of the test and trace system at the start of the programme. When you look at the numbers, there are a huge number of people going for tests. Isn't that just what's going to happen with any system run by anyone if you've got that many people using it?
So we've had the whole summer to plan for this. The schools going back, the hospitals going, the universities, going back, the start of the kind of flu season where you get people with symptoms who don't have COVID, but they've got other flus. We knew this was coming, and we know already that the government have made mistakes in terms of the contracts and the use of labs, and not using some of the labs from universities or Public Health England that they could have done. We know that mistakes have been made, but look, why this matters. One of the local director of public health officials said to me that it looked like in London, just looking at the numbers as they're rising in London, that it looked like we were back at, you know, perhaps sort of end of January, beginning of February time at the start of the first pandemic. Now that means we have no time to spare. We have to get on top of this so that we don't have that second wave. And the government, you know, saying there'll be 4 more labs, but Prime Minister yesterday having no idea when there'll be finished and no idea whether care homes were being tested every week or not in Prime Minister's questions, it's not good enough. And this is really serious and the government have to move a lot faster.
So, Bim, we're almost going backwards then. We're kind of back to where we were in January, and we know what happened after January. It was February and March.
Well, clearly not going backwards. What has happened here is that the demand has been unprecedented, and we are now getting our testing, continuing to increase that testing to meet that demand. But look, the key point here, in addition to all of that, is that we need to make sure all of the things work in parallel. So it's the testing, the contact tracing app is being launched, I think, on the 24th of September. That will help a lot as well deal with this problem and dealing with the localised issues where they arise, such as in the northeast. All of these things together are what we need in order to defeat this, because what we all need to try and do is make sure we don't end up with a second national lockdown. The country can't afford it, businesses can't afford it, we don't want to live our lives like that. And so that's why the government's working on getting all of these things working in parallel in the coming days and weeks.
Sarah, are you convinced?
Well, I think we have to move a lot faster, and we're going to talk about this.
How
but things
you
like
can't magic up a new lab that does 70,000 tests just by clicking your fingers. It takes weeks to build it.
Of course it takes weeks to build it. The Prime Minister needs to be on top of this, not fiddling about with the internal market bill and ministers resigning left, right and centre and everyone being distracted over things that we thought were already settled. The Prime Minister needs to take control of the situation. He needs to get a grip. He needs to use every single bit of testing laboratory that we can find. Why on earth the app is only coming online when in May, when the Prime Minister launched his big 4 pillars of test and trace, one of which was this national app. That was in May, and we're now in September, and we still haven't got it. I mean, these things need a lot more work. We're all happy to help. Local government are doing everything they possibly can to make sure people are doing the right things. All our public services are, but the government need to step up the pace and quickly.
Now, you'd expect a Labour MP to criticise the government's handling of the situation, but would you expect perhaps the Daily Mail to do a front page like this, saying, Boris, we've failed? That's a reference to the Prime Minister who was at a committee yesterday of MPs, and they said, do we have enough capacity? And he said, no. And then you turn to the Spectator, and their front page is, where's Boris? And then the blonde mop disappearing below the waves. Chris, at YouGov, when you measure public perceptions of this, do they blame the government or do they blame the virus? Do they think like Tory MPs, Labour MPs? Who do they think like?
So we've been tracking attitudes for how well or badly the public think the government is responding to coronavirus pretty much since the start of the outbreak, and we've been tracking it weekly. Our new figures out this morning are the worst numbers for the government yet. So more than twice as many people think the government is doing badly than well. So it's not been a good week for the government. We're seeing dramatic drop-off in numbers, and I think this argument around testing and the coverage in the press and TV off the back of that is the main reason for that drop.
Inaya, do you think there is a kind of political philosophy issue here, and if you'd come at it from a different viewpoint, it would have been handled differently?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that there has been a very kind of one-sided view. I think that the debate has been we haven't locked down strong enough, or the measures haven't been hard enough, versus whether or not these measures are actually effective or helpful as a whole. I mean, there has always been various different routes, such as the Sweden route, where they have almost none of the measures that we are now pushing forth, and they're not necessarily dealing with the catastrophe situation that we're facing now. At the end of the day, when we have a pandemic, that is an unprecedented situation, and the government is going to make mistakes, and I think most of the public recognise that and respect that they are trying very hard. But I think part of the problem is trying to over-control certain things that are actually very uncertain. The public has followed the measures, generally speaking, very well. There's been very high compliance rate. And I think at some point we have to be able to enable the public to take responsibility and calculate this risk. We don't know how long the virus is going to be with us. Is that months or years or even longer than that? And actually enforcing these measures, hanging the potential of lockdown over our heads indefinitely, is not healthy.
John, conveniently, you've worked in a British government and you currently advise the Swedish government. Do British people have a Swedish level of self-responsibility, or do we actually need to be a bit more tightly controlled?
Look, I think Sweden had an approach that was suitable and effective for Sweden, There was a failure similar to ours and the Australians, which is in deaths in care homes, which I think no country has solved properly. British people are very, very willing to take instruction from the government. The lockdown, when we were asked to lock down immediately, there were fears in government that we wouldn't do it. The Swedish people were asked to be respectful of each other, and they did that. The issue at the moment is we're not getting a clear idea of what the government's strategy is. Is it safety first? So, which is how people are acting. They're going to get themselves tested. They're being told maybe they're overburdening the system, but people are expecting the system to be there so they could then go back to work. Is it health service first? Is it teachers first? There's a lack of clarity about this priority list you're asking BIM for. And I think in the end, we're in this for the long haul. You had the CDC head yesterday saying it'll be maybe until autumn next year before there's a vaccine that'll be available in the US. I'm sure that must apply to us too. So we have to find a way to stop the R rate rising. We've stopped talking about the R rate. And one of the issues you touched on there, I know a teacher who's self-isolating with her partner. Her partner took a test on Saturday, still hasn't had the result back. That'll be a whole week of teaching lost for that class.
But just very quickly, as somebody who's worked in Downing Street, can you imagine how difficult it is building this entire test and trace programme, plus all the public health measures, plus keeping the country running? How hard that is? I mean, that's like the space programme times 10 in 1 month.
Well, the thing is, we've known since March we needed test, track and trace. It's not that it was had to be built in a month. We've had the whole of the pandemic period, the lockdown period, to be planning and preparing. That's where I agree with Sarah. This is a self-imposed limit on the capacity because the planning could have been going on before.
Okay, Sarah mentioned the infamous app, which English people are going to get on the 24th of September. I've actually got a trial version of it. It is not nearly as exciting as you might think it would be, but then maybe it'll get more exciting when more people have got the app and it actually all works. In Scotland, they've had the app all week because they released their version there on Monday, and now we can talk about it with the Times health reporter in Scotland, Helen Puttick. Hello, Helen. Have you got the app? How does it work? How does it feel having it in your pocket finally?
Yes, we have downloaded the app. It's really early days, but engagement in obtaining the app seems to have been quite good in Scotland. We know that a study suggested 15% of the population needed to download it in order for the infection rate to reduce by about 8%. And very quickly, 600,000 people did download it. The numbers are going upwards from there. So we've achieved that level of coverage. Of course, it's only effective if lots of people have it. So I have joined those people with it, and we'll wait to see how good it is in practice.
We've all been on tenterhooks waiting for the various apps in various parts of the United Kingdom. Have things emerged about how it works or how it feels to have it now that you finally have it?
No, a couple of questions have been raised. There's one expert in technology asking how good it really is at detecting fellow app users who are a couple of metres away for 15 minutes. I saw someone on social media this morning saying how much of her roaming data had been used up since she downloaded the app, and does she need to turn it on and off, which might raise questions about how well people will use it if they remember to have it on and that kind of thing. And the other question which hasn't been answered yet is, have we had an app user test positive for COVID and then gone on to detect those people who were near them in the preceding period? It's too late for that. We're asking those questions of the government and we're waiting to find out.
And very quickly, what's the testing situation in Scotland? Just sum it up for us.
So yesterday the First Minister was saying repeatedly that access to testing was very good. That's quite new though. As of 2 weeks ago there were people in my area in eastern Scotland being sent way up north, 80 odd miles to Aberdeen for a test. Certainly when the schools went back we had lots of stories like that, and people reporting long delays, and they have been hit by a backlog in results recently. But apparently access, if you have symptoms and you need a test right now, is, according to Nicola Sturgeon, quite good.
Helen, thank you very much. Right, this morning everyone was talking about the Boris Johnson interview in the Sun newspaper. Lots of interesting things in it. But he also refers to, presumably, one of his favourite films, Animal House, from 1978. And he was referring to that in the context of that thing we've talked about all week, where a couple of ministers have suggested that if you see a group of more than 6 on your street, you should maybe call the police and dob them in. The Prime Minister is saying, no, it's only for Animal House-style parties with hot tubs and so forth. Actually, John, very quickly, do you want to give us a capsule review and plot summary of Animal House? It's not one of your favourites?
I do not know that film.
Fair enough. But Bim, do you have any neighbours with hot tubs having any wild parties? Would you dob them in?
I don't, or at least they haven't invited me, which says
You'd say no if they did.
Yeah, exactly. I definitely would say no. Yes, indeed. Look, I feel a bit uncomfortable about this idea of dobbing people in. My view is if I see people doing things that I know are against the rules, is I will go and speak to them and I will say respectfully, look, it's against the rules. You should probably put an end to it. And I actually think as a society, we should try and always speak to people and engage with people first before sort of engaging law enforcement. I think that keeps everything in a much better place.
Yeah, right. To the United States now, because that's where Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary, went yesterday. We heard earlier on a little clip from the press conference he did with Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, where they all sounded very chummy. Then the Foreign Secretary went to go and see the other side of the aisle, the Democrats. He saw Nancy Pelosi. And then Joe Biden, the Democrat presidential candidate, tweeted this in the context of the Brexit deal. We can't allow the Good Friday Agreement that brought peace to Northern Ireland to become a casualty of Brexit. Any trade deal between the US and the UK must be contingent upon respect for the agreement and preventing the return of a hard border. Period. So, Bim, news of the internal market bill has even reached the ears of Joe Biden, who's fighting to become president.
Yes, and he's right. The Good Friday Agreement is incredibly important, and any trade deal that we do, whether it be with the EU or the US, has to fully respect it. But the main focus of the internal market bill is very much on strengthening this union, the Union of the United Kingdom, and that's why the SNP, and I was in the House of Commons yesterday with the SNP sort of making very sort of angry speeches about it, that's why they dislike it so much, is because they know it strengthens our union here in the United Kingdom.
Let's focus, though, still on the Northern Ireland bits of the internal market bill, which would allow the government to overwrite some bits of the Brexit deal in some circumstances. The government's done a deal with some of the Conservative rebels. Bim, do you think the government needed to tweak the bill? Because you were happy to vote for it at second reading on Monday. You didn't think it needed any tweaks on Monday.
Well, I didn't, but also, as you will know, it's typical at second reading, for things not to get voted down. I was closely in touch with members of my party who were talking to the Prime Minister and the whips about getting additional, parliamentary oversight over any use of powers. And I think it's very important for people to know that these particular clauses would only be brought into force in the event that we felt the EU committed a breach of the agreement. We'd exhausted all the options under the Joint Committee and at arbitration. And after that, in the last resort as an insurance policy, we had to make sure that we remain a strong United Kingdom and that we had completely unfettered access between GB and Northern Ireland in both directions. That's really what this is about. And now what we've added, quite rightly in my view, is that Parliament will have an additional say if any minister at any point were to exercise powers under these clauses. Sure. I think it really sets out very clearly, the steps here, and that this is really an insurance provision.
Sarah, that all sounds reasonable. That means you can vote for it when the amendments come up on Monday.
But the internal markets bill should have been a simple piece of legislation looking at when powers move from the EU to here, how do we make sure everything's distributed in the right way to enable business to operate and for our devolved nations to have the right kind of levels of power. The Prime Minister is unpicking what was already agreed and what we thought was done, and he says he wants to protect the Good Friday Agreement. But every interview I've seen with the Irish government says they didn't know this was coming, and they're the co-signatories of the Good Friday Agreement. They think it's damaging trust. They think it's damaging their ability to protect the Good Friday Agreement. And words are cheap. We reached the Good Friday Agreement, John will know this, because of years of building trust, building relationships, not offending people, not blindsiding them, not doing things that they didn't see coming, but by building those relationships. And thank goodness Boris Johnson wasn't the Prime Minister at the time of the Good Friday Agreement, because he's managed to upset Northern Ireland, he's managed to upset every EU nation, he's managed to upset the Americans, who we need a deal. And why does all this matter? Fundamentally, we need a deal because of jobs. We need a deal on security so that we can fight crime. We need to maintain our international reputation so that we can stand up what's right. And more importantly than everything, Prime Minister should be getting on with solving the COVID crisis instead of turning around, who's resign next, how am I going to fix this mess I've got myself into.
Bim?
Well, Sarah said we need a deal because of jobs. Well, the internal market bill, the main focus of it is preserving jobs, to make sure that business can operate as smoothly as possible within the United Kingdom. We need a deal because of security of our union, to make sure that we can, workers can move across all countries, to make sure that their professional qualifications are recognised, etc., and various other provisions around goods and services. We need a deal for our reputation, Sarah said. Well, this means that if we're signing trade deals with any other country, that country knows that the goods that it might import in as part of that trade deal can go freely within the United Kingdom and not be held up by bureaucratic obstacles within it. So I agree with her that we need a deal for all those things, and I think the Internal Markets Bill will help those things going forward.
John, let's go back to the Biden tweet. What was he actually getting at with that tweet? What's going on in the American political world that means he wants to say that?
Two really important things. First is that the Irish lobby in Congress has been a force since the 1920s. That's the first time the New York Times referred to congressional Irish lobby. So the Irish voters and Irish politicians are very important. The second thing is really important, which is the US government are a guarantor of what is a peace treaty that was settled after a very, very vicious and violent conflict in the United Kingdom, and they take that responsibility really, really seriously. Joe Biden was reflecting what Nancy Pelosi would have said yesterday to Dominic Raab, which is, it's not the president who signs treaties, it's Congress who has to approve them. And you have a big blocking majority here with the Democrats and the Irish congressional bloc. You're not going to get a treaty through if you risk the Good Friday Agreement. We take seriously our role as the guarantor, and I think that is misunderstood sometimes when people focus only on the relationship with the president.
I mean, everyone was tweeting about this last night after Joe Biden sent his tweet. Have a look at what Conor Burns, the Conservative MP, said. He said, "Hey Joe Biden, would you like to discuss the Good Friday Agreement? It's also called the Belfast Agreement, so it doesn't offend both traditions. Did you actually know that? I was born in Northern Ireland and I'm a Catholic and a Unionist." And so the government's trying to balance it up with that side too. Inaya, do you think Joe Biden should just butt out?
Yes, I mean, I think he should focus on his ailing election campaign. It's unsurprising he's made these comments. He was VP under Obama, who tried to back Remain, but that massively backfired. This is a democratic decision, and it has nothing to do with Joe Biden. However, I think, at the end of the day, Boris Johnson did say to everybody that everything was oven ready, but he has been elected with an 80-seat majority, and his fundamental mandate is, as he said, to get Brexit done. So I think that a lot of the British people that supported Brexit, which was the majority, will back Boris if he does what he needs to do to ensure that we protect our sovereignty and follow through with the democratic decision. So I think most people support Boris on this.
Inaya, do you think Boris Johnson is a bit stuffed if Joe Biden wins?
Yes, I think that is worrying. I think I don't know if he's going to win. I highly doubt it, but I think for him to be burning bridges and making such strong statements so early is very concerning, and I don't think that's going to do good if he ends up being president for British-American relations.
Also, when you say he's ailing, Joe Biden is ahead in the polls, so that's a quite weird definition of ailing. But yeah, John, we always get very excited about the presidential election and what it means for Britain. Does it ever mean that much for Britain?
Strong leader, and so I think we would like to have, from a British point of view, a defence partner, a trade partner, somebody who can negotiate to get all of the reforms we need to get through the international organisations to make them work again. And the WHO needs a lot of work done on it. It doesn't need the kind of thing that Donald Trump does for it.
Inaya?
I think I do think that we need to have positive relationship with our American partners, but I don't think President Trump is necessarily undermining that. I think it's comments like Joe Biden which undermine sovereignty and the democratic decision in relation to Brexit that actually do more damage to relations than anything that President Trump has done.
Chris, the UK public have 0 votes in the American race, but if they did, who would they choose?
Oh, Biden, overwhelmingly. Donald Trump is very, very much not a popular politician in the UK, so yeah, Biden would win by a landslide if it was Britain voting or if it was pretty much any other country in the world voting.
Bim, you're never going to answer this question in a million years. Who would you choose?
No, I might surprise you. Look, if I had a vote, I'd choose Joe Biden, because I think that Trump has not been a terribly helpful person for the international order as John described. But the critical thing is that whoever is in the White House, Britain needs to have a good relationship with them. We don't get to choose who it is, but we need to have a good relationship. Our partnership is so enduring, it's so important, and we need to make sure we work with whoever is in the White House.
Yeah, but Joe Biden's already sent a smackdown tweet to your leader, and he's not even president yet.
Well, I think, as John in particular will know, American election season, presidential elections are hot and busy things. Joe Biden is thinking about his own domestic audience. I don't think we should read too much into that. I'm sure if he wins, he knows that the relationship between the US and the UK outlasts and is far greater than any individual prime minister or president.
Right. Let's look at some social media and some adverts that the various parties have been putting out in the last few days. The first one, this came out in the wake of the Internal Market Bill, which we've talked about quite enough. Breaking news, Labour just voted to side with the EU. Sarah, why did you cite... Oh, and also we've got the Labour version, which says, get the Brexit deal done. We've never heard that before. So, Sarah, why did you side with the EU on Monday?
I mean, it's just laughable, isn't it? And except it's not, because it's really serious. The Prime Minister really unpicking all these things that had been agreed when we thought everything had been settled, just so he can make crass points like that. Really, I mean, Bim just gave a really good answer about how he would support, he wouldn't support Trump if there was an election, and he's a good and interesting MP, and he made a speech this week about how the Conservatives need to rediscover their principles, and I completely agree with him. I think we're lost at sea with Boris Johnson, and what we need to focus on is coronavirus first, and getting a good deal with all the countries around the world in terms of trade, and making sure we protect our country, and we're the country that we want to be, and we're seen to be a country of law and order around the world, and Boris is throwing that all over the edge just so he can make a few cheap political points.
Inaya, do you think siding with the EU?
No, none of the people you mentioned were siding with the EU. I think the point around Labour
hang on, though.
is...
They did the same thing as the people that you're accusing of siding with the EU, i.e. not voting for the bill.
Well, no. In those instances, the argument was, and mentioned Bob Neill, he's now actually been working very constructively in Parliament with the Prime Minister to make sure that we improve the bill, and that's what we talked about a few minutes ago. The broader point around Labour is this. They have, one of the reasons why they're doing so poorly in Scotland is that they refuse to be full-throated in their defence of the United Kingdom. our union, and the internal market bill is overwhelmingly a bill about preserving the unity of the United Kingdom and strengthening our bonds. And the Labour Party just prefers, in that instance, to take a position with the European Union rather than strengthening our United Kingdom. And that's the fundamental point around the internal market bill. And the Labour Party is going to have to work out, is it really a unionist party or not? Absolutely nonsense.
Why?
Sorry, didn't realise you were on me.
We're on you all the time.
Because the internal market bill was quite a simple piece of legislation. It didn't need to be this ripping up of everything that's gone before. And if you think that Michael Howard saying that this is wrong means that this is some big want the best deal for the UK. From my point of view as Shadow Policing Minister, it's really important that we've got some security arrangements in place where we're sharing data so that we can arrest criminals. And the Prime Minister was asked about that yesterday. He had absolutely no idea where that's got to. So there's some really important stuff that we need to track.
Chris, have you got any evidence that these ads are reaching people or that they're working?
I think on this entire issue, it's probably a score draw, and I don't think either party has much ground left to make on Brexit. They'll make the case they make. These adverts are probably expressing the best arguments that the two parties have on Brexit, but ultimately it's a difficult situation for the Conservatives because they said that they'd get Brexit done. They therefore don't want it to be seen that Brexit's still ongoing, and it's a very difficult situation for Labour because it was one of the biggest reasons why they lost the election last year, and they're trying to manage a difficult coalition on Brexit. So I don't actually think there's much to gain from either parties on Brexit, and I think they're probably better off, both of them, talking about
grouse shooting. So it clearly wasn't some kind of mad Tory plot to please their donors. And I thought that Angela Rayner had a great performance yesterday at PMQs, apart from that silly little bit to appeal to who? Not to any swing voters, not to most members of the Labour Party who think that kind of posturing is ridiculous, but probably to her own core vote on the left. But they support her anyway. So I thought it was a stupid thing to do, and it was stupid to back it up with an advert.
Sarah, inane, ridiculous, stupid?
No, and I think it adds to the confusion. That's the issue about what people are allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. The Prime Minister asked his own backbenchers if they understood the rules, and they didn't. The police say to me it's really important that these things are clear, and when you have all these different rules that are very difficult to understand, and then everybody's not quite sure what they're supposed to do, that's the problem.
Yeah. Sarah, we're running out of time, but John, those adverts have always been with us, they'll always be with us, won't they?
Oh yeah, there'll always be these kind of adverts. But the point is, if you don't have a position to appeal to, a framing narrative to basically on, Keir Starmer's trying to say everything is about competence, and that's why Get Brexit Done is a great thing for the Labour Party to say, because we want to see whether that's done or not, competently or not.
Yeah, forget about Brexit, that's the programme done. Thanks for having me. Joe's back on Monday. Have a good weekend.
More than 12 million Africans were enslaved and trafficked. More than 2 million of our ancestors died at sea. The oceans won't stories that haven't been told.
This is ground zero for the whole transatlantic slave trade.
The story of the slave trade is world history. It's not something unique to America. It was a worldwide phenomenon.
Antiques enthusiasts going head to head. It may be a dealer in 45 minutes on BBC Two. First though, show us who's boss.